All right, guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about this, an LWRC M6 IC A5 chambered in 5.56. Now, some of you might remember that I have already done a review on this particular rifle, and I'll actually put the link to the description for that review. However, this is a viewer requested revisit on this particular rifle. We're going to talk over some things that were brought up in the comment section on the last video, as well as some updates on how I feel about some of this rifle's features and accessories. Now, as we go through this, we will go through my normal order. We just are not going to spend all of our time on the features, the history, and all that kind of stuff. So, talking about all of the features, all of the history of this particular rifle. So that's something that you want. I implore you to go check out the other videos so you get the full information that you might be after. Now, history is kind of the first thing I want to go ahead and address. And I did make a mistake in the previous video on the history portion. So in that video, I stated that LWRC was dismissed from the individual carbine trials because they were a small company and there was a concern that they would not be able to keep up with the demand of production for rifles. As somebody pointed out in the comment section, and I have further researched, I apparently got some companies mixed up, and that was not the case for LWRC during the IC competition. LWRC actually removed itself from the running because it decided that the individual carbine program was going nowhere. And instead of investing more money, time, and effort into a program that wasn't going to give them the results that they wanted, they decided to take the product that they had developed and market it elsewhere. And they would actually wind up getting several lucrative contracts. Over the years, they have been supplying to foreign governments all over the world. And I actually remember a Recoil magazine article a couple years ago where they were talking about LWRC coming up with a PDW for, I think it was Saudi Arabia. And it had kind of like this cool sort of stormtrooper look to it. If I can find a photo, I'll roll it into the video. Now, that pretty much brings us up to date on history type portions that I need to call out. Why don't we go ahead and start talking about the features and cover how it is that I feel about this particular rifle. Starting off with the nickel boron coating on both the bolt carrier and the trigger mechanism. How do I feel about these materials? Well, starting with the bolt carrier. The great thing about nickel boron, or a lot of other of these types of coatings on bolts, is that it does have a tendency to make for ease of cleaning. Carbon and stuff like that will not necessarily stick to the bolt. However, this is a piston-driven design, so carbon is not necessarily one of our big concerns. There's not a lot of gunk that's coming back into the receiver. So this bolt, with the number of rounds that I put through it, this bolt has never been terribly dirty. It's always taken me just a rag in order to be able to get it back to where it is that it needs to be. But Nicor also has a self-lubricating capability to it, and that is very interesting. Now, once again, we don't necessarily have a lot of stuff or heat coming back into the receiver on piston-driven type setups, and I do think this application or this feature is probably a little bit better on direct gas impingement guns. However, it's still extending your lubrication for your rifle a little bit longer, and there are outside influences that could impact reliable functions, so that being things like dust or sand or something along those lines. Now, of course, if you get enough of that stuff in there, it's going to gunk up the gun pretty quickly. However, it can at least ward off casual exposure to dust and other environmental conditions. In addition to that, having a self-lubricating bolt, let's say you're doing a high round count course, 1,000 or 1,500 round course, that self-lubricating bolt is going to keep that rifle up and running longer reliably. So this way you're not interrupting whatever strings of fire or whatever learning points are supposed to be coming across to you with having to clear malfunctions as early. It's still eventually going to happen. This does not ward off malfunctions, but it will extend the longevity so that you can focus on what the actual training goal is as opposed to getting free malfunction clearance. If somebody wants you to clear malfunctions on courses of fire, they will institute a malfunction one way or another. So that is an advantage of these types of properties on the bolt, and I do still think that they are applicable in piston-driven guns. I just think they're more applicable in DI guns. Now, the nickel boron coating on the trigger mechanism, I am not that big a fan of. this is supposed to enhance this trigger, and I've got to say that overall, this is still basically a mil-spec trigger. It's kind of, it's got a two-stage feel to it, but I would not put this that much ahead of any of my mil-spec triggers. In fact, in the original video, I mentioned that it felt like somebody kind of smeared this with butter. And I want to clarify that a little bit more, because normally whenever somebody says something like butter, they're referring to it being very smooth, tracking very easily and all that kind of stuff. This feels like somebody put chunks of like cold butter in there. So I feel like I'm overcoming a whole bunch of just gunk that is caked on the trigger, as opposed to this like super smooth light pull. Now, I'm not a trigger snob by any means. Pretty much all of my rifles have mil-spec triggers in them, except for my Mark 12 inspired build, which has a CMC 3.5 pound single stage. If you're interested in that build, I'll throw the link in the description as well. But, so with that being the case, like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this rifle is terrible because it doesn't have a 2.5 pound trigger. But I could understand somebody being upset with the cost of this rifle at over $2,000, at MSRP over $2,500. I could see someone being angry that it doesn't come with a better trigger. However, I would point out that triggers are not the only value associated with features in an AR-15. There are plenty of other ways to be able to derive the cost of this rifle. And we'll talk about that more as we go through and kind of culminate with that at the end. All right, so that's the Nicor treatment. Why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the ambidextrous features that this rifle comes with. I am still dubious as to the inherent advantage of ambidextrous features. So my original training on the AR-15 platform entirely involved single side safety, bolt release, all that kind of stuff. I default to that anytime it is that you put me under pressure. So measures that I would use to function a single side safety are going to happen regardless of whether or not I have an ambidextrous safety or this, that, and the other thing. So I am maybe not the best person to talk to about the advantages of an ambidextrous gun, as opposed to either a left-handed person who doesn't have a lot of experience shooting mostly right-handed guns, or somebody who's brand new to the AR-15 platform and is going to get a lot of opportunity to build habits with an ambidextrous gun. However, there are a couple things that I do like. First off, it's that I can reach this ambidextrous bolt release with my trigger finger. So this way, if I'm on a course of fire for a range or a competition, it's very easy to show clear. I can do that with fewer manipulations than I have in the past, the gun back and forth and do some kind of like weird stuff, bring it against my hip in order to be able to lock the bolt to the rear. And I do appreciate that. And if I had trained to conduct my magazine reloads using my trigger finger to release the bolt, that would also be a little bit faster than inserting mag, rolling up, hitting the ping pong, and then getting back on the rifle. This just allows this hand to get back on the rifle while this finger can go ahead and release the bolt. However, this is the only rifle I have that has that feature, so I don't train that. I still train to work off of the bolt release on this side, because every other AR-15 I have has that capability, and only that capability. Now, the ambidextrous magazine release located on this side, I, again, am kind of dubious as to its advantages. Now, if you were left-handed, once again, this would be great. And if you were to be injured in a fight or running a course of fire where you had diminished use of your strong side and had to work off of your support side, I could see a couple of ways in which being able to drop the magazine with your support hand would be very advantageous, especially if you were doing reloads off of a barrier. So you have the rifle pressed into the barrier, you can drop your magazine and then more easily be able to manipulate the rifle, as opposed to having to do something wonky in order to be able to drop the magazine with the strong side magazine release. Okay, that's advantageous if you're doing a lot of that type of stuff, that you're training that, or you're going to courses where they're forcing that. That is helpful to be able to do that. However, that's also something that you're going to do a very small percentage of the time. That may not necessarily be worth the value to you, or that may not be a value to you, especially whenever we talk about this cost benefit analysis, to have that capability. The ambidextrous charging handle is, I mean, a charging handle is a charging handle is a charging handle to me. If I had a higher magnification object that was hanging over top of the charging handle, this would be very nice in order to be able to reach it. But I don't get broken up about charging handles, honestly. Now the safety, I do have some strong opinions when it comes to safeties, and I do not care for ambidextrous safeties. I'm not against them, as in I'm going to avoid rifles that have them, but there are a couple of complaints I have, and that's mostly that functioning the safety irritates my grip. So I actually have to kind of break my hand a little bit in order to function that safety, or I've got to bring the thumb around. I have to change my grip in some way to be able to successfully manipulate this so that it doesn't irritate my grip. And that does annoy me, especially since, you know, again, going back to my early training, what I'm used to doing is curling my hand back whenever I'm doing transition shooting to function the safety, because if I'm going to safe, the threat has been neutralized and I don't need to have the rifle on fire anymore. It's okay for me to break my grip at that point. This is a little bit more difficult to do that same type of thing with. So this is a minor complaint. It's something that can be worked around. It's just something that I've always noticed with ambidextrous safeties. All right, so now that we kind of talked about the features of the rifle, why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the accessories that I added, how things have changed. Now, this still has the Surefire M600 dual fuel setup. However, I have made a change to this. So originally, I had this set up with the clicky tail cap, and I do prefer clicky tail caps whenever I get the opportunity because it's more difficult to accidentally function them, which means that you have a diminished possibility of a negligent discharge of light, which in certain situations, a negligent discharge of light is just as dangerous as a ende of your firearm, you know, sending a bullet at a time that you didn't expect to send a bullet. These can be, in certain situations, equally dangerous. However, I have started to change some of my opinions on this matter, and that's primarily when it comes to being able to do transitional type shooting and still be able to function my light. With the 90-degree offset mount like this is here, it is difficult for me to reach this tail cap. I have to turn the rifle a lot. I'm already shooting from kind of a suboptimal position. How much more suboptimal do I really want to make it? Well, the answer is I want to try to control that as much as I can. So for the moment, I am running a pressure pad on it up until such time as I get an offset mount that'll move this light up a little bit higher, so it'll be easier to be able to reach with my other thumb, should I be doing support side shooting. All right, so coming back to the optic. Now, guys, there have been a lot of opinions expressed to me in the comments section about this optic. Most people feel that I'm doing this rifle dirty by not putting some type of variable magnification optic on this rifle. However, I mean, the first most outstanding thing is that it's my rifle and I'm going to set it up how I want. Now, in addition to that, I like red dots. I do a lot of my training is based around very close range stuff. I get more advantage out of red dots than I do out of variable power optics at that point. In addition to that, high power variable optics, like some people have stated they have placed on their rifles, would be applicable if I was trying to maybe make this into some sort of MK12 Mod H build, which this wouldn't be the worst candidate for, just based solely on the thick cross section of this barrel. However, that's not what I'm trying to do. And running around with a 3-to-9 scope on this and trying to do my actual intended purpose for this rifle is not a good combo for me. That's too much weight. That's too much complication in the optic. I'm not necessarily going to have the scope box that I need and all that kind of stuff with eye relief and everything like that. This unlimited eye relief. This works out pretty great for that, shooting around barriers and all that kind of stuff. In addition to that, I am incredibly comfortable with red dot optics at a distance. I have taken red dots out to 550 before, and you can do it just as surely as you can take iron sights out that far. The only issues that come up is if you're trying to identify a target or if you're trying to read impacts so that you can make adjustments. So shooting out at 550 with a red dot is not terribly easy, but if you know your holdovers and hold unders, have good application of your fundamentals, you can absolutely make hits out to distance with these optics. Now, when it comes to cost, a lot of people used to be of the opinion that you had to put the same amount of money into your optic as you did your rifle. And I don't think that holds up very well for a couple of reasons. One, that's a lot of money, especially when you're talking about an a over $2,000 rifle like this. You're now talking about over $2,000 worth of glass. You have near $5,000, if not more than $5,000 invested into your setup before anything else is even done. That's a big ask. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's not possible, but that is potentially a lot of times somebody's sitting around without a rifle or without an effective rifle. And if somebody wants something good like this, they don't have to jump straight to only premium options. There are plenty of optics that are punching well above their weight. Now, whenever you look at more budget or less expensive magnified optics, you do have a couple of trade-offs that you have to take into account. First off, it's visual clarity. Now, optic clarity is just, it's not bad in budget optics, but when you compare budget optics to expensive optics, you really see the difference. And you may not necessarily notice it out of the range, and I would argue that the vast majority of people wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. But if you do put the two right next to each other, there's a very clear difference. However, when you're talking about tactile and audible clicks, proper tracking in like a scope box and all that kind of stuff, as well as effective reticles, illumination, whatever it is that you want to go after, there are plenty of good options that are not that expensive and are still durable. They are still worth the money or punching well above the weight for the money that they are. Vortex was built on that concept, more or less. And there are plenty of other manufacturers that are doing the same. Now, some could say that I probably should have spent more money on my red dot if I wanted to go the red dot direction. But it's not 20 years ago where your options were like, I could either buy an EOTech or an Aimpoint, both of which are pretty expensive. You can find a large number of inexpensive red dots that are durable, that are capable, that have great battery life and all that kind of stuff. The Spark AR, the Sig Romeo 5, Holosuns. Holosuns are fighting in Ukraine right now. These optics work. Now, also, these optics are light. This entire rifle, as configured, comes in at 7.4 pounds. The base rifle is about 7 pounds. I have not added a lot of additional weight, and I like that because that keeps this rifle trim and balanced. And we'll talk about that more once we get to shooting. All right, now, the sling I'm not in love with. I just don't hate it enough to throw it away. So at some point I'll upgrade the sling, but for the moment it stays. All right, guys, that's features and accessories. Why don't we go ahead and talk about shooting? How does it shoot? All right, now the shooting aspect of this is also something that has been a hot topic of debate in the comments section on the original video. Quite a few of you out there are shooting these rifles off benches with 3 to 9 power scopes or 4 to 14s, whatever it is that it may be. An important thing to keep in mind about this channel is I evaluate rifles based off of how they will be used. I'm not talking about best case situations. I'm talking about the stuff that you're going to take to competitions that you're potentially going to defend yourself with or go to courses with. And I'm going to represent that accuracy. So I don't have a powerful magnified optic that I rotate between rifles for testing. I set them up how it is that I intend to use them, and then I give you the accuracy results based off of that optic. In addition to that, I utilize cheap ammunition because that's what I have. That's probably what you're going to take to competitions and or courses or potentially have to fight with. So how it performs with cheap ammunition is a data point. Any rifle on the market right now with a combination of shooter, ammunition, and optic can achieve 1 MOA. That's uninteresting to me. I want to represent to you what you'll actually get out of the rifle. So everyone who's hopping in the comments section talking about shooting it with heavy grain ammunition or hand loads, I don't care. especially if it's hand loads. I don't have your hand loads. I don't have a reloading setup. I'm not going to make your hand loads. I'm not going to have your hand loads in a supply that I can take to a competition, a course, or even defend myself with. This data point is not helpful to me because I cannot replicate it. But I can give you data based off of manufactured ammunition that's probably sitting in your local gun shop right now. So with that, I took this rifle to the range yesterday, and cold bore, I managed to get this 3 5/8 inch group with Armscore 55 grain FMJ at 100 yards. And if you're having trouble picking out the impacts, I'll roll in a picture and see if I can make it a little bit easier. But I'm pretty happy with that. When you consider that originally with 55 grain ammunition, I was getting closer to 4 MOA groups, I'm pretty happy with 3 5/8. That is trending in the proper direction. In addition to that, this is a 1-in-7 twist barrel, so it doesn't necessarily like 55 grain ammunition, but that's what I have lying around, so that's what it is that we're shooting it with. All right, so that's how it is performing accuracy-wise. What about overall shooting dynamic and all that kind of stuff? One of the things that I love about this rifle is how it's gassed. A lot of times, piston-driven AR-15s have a tendency to move around a lot on the shoulder. You have to really drive into the gun in order to be able to keep it on target, more so than you would on a comparable direct gas impingement rifle. This, however, is gassed beautifully in such a way that it really doesn't move that much. In addition to that, with the weight of the rifle and how the weight is distributed across the rifle, this gun flows in the hand. I don't feel like I have to push a lot of energy into it to be able to drive it from target to target. I don't feel like I have to spend a lot of time trying to slow it down like I might on a rifle with, say, an 8-inch handguard and 16 inches worth of barrel. Sometimes with that setup, especially since you're chicken winging a little bit, you have a tendency to overdrive or have to slow it down and all that kind of stuff, and it can really mess up your transitions between targets. This rifle doesn't do that. It is wonderfully balanced, and I really, really like it. Combine that with its smooth recoil property, and this thing is an absolute blast on more dynamic style shooting. I really enjoy shooting this rifle. All right, guys. Well, that's how it shoots. What is this rifle to me? Well, guys, this is a fighting rifle for me. That's why it has the optic that it has on it and all that kind of stuff. I have no problem with taking this to competitions or courses and defending myself if I needed to. One of the interesting aspects about this is, though I generally prefer shorter setups, this rifle is light enough and handy enough, lively in the hands, that it performs like something much shorter. It is very easy to drive up onto it, get it into where it is I need to go, work around corners and all that kind of stuff. I enjoy using this in confined spaces, even though it is rather long. Now, what would I recommend your uses be? And let's go ahead. Well, first off, who would I recommend this rifle for? Well, I would recommend it for competition shooters because of its reliability. And I would recommend it for any type of professional, law enforcement, contractor, whatever it is that it may be, who needs a dependable rifle. I would say that this is definitely an excellent choice in that regard. This is going to work out great for you. But there is one thing that we need to talk about, and that is kind of the cost-benefit analysis here. If you're somebody who's just going to go to the range and shoot off of a bench, maybe put a high-powered optic on this and really stress out over groups and all this kind of stuff, and not really use this rifle to its full potential, I would not necessarily recommend this rifle to you. I would sooner recommend this rifle to someone who's going to go to courses, who's going to go to competitions and all that kind of stuff, and really get the most out of the reliability aspect of it. Because, like, yes, we have this wonderful barrel, this fluting reduces the weight by like 20% or something like that, but we still have a rigid, thick barrel that really could help in accuracy and keeping some of the heat at bay over time. But with the more commonly available ammunition, it's not the most accurate rifle in the world. A trigger, not necessarily the best overall trigger and all that kind of stuff. But we have a lot of proprietary features here that are excellent. We can easily access and clean the gas piston setup. That's very nice. It's not necessarily always the case, and it's very easy to do on this particular setup with how this rail is built. Our gassing and recoil and all that kind of stuff are exceedingly excellent for a piston-driven gun. I've shot quite a few piston-driven AR-15s over the years. These ambidextrous features may be more applicable to you than they are to somebody who has some of the kind of training scars or background that I have. Those are value added. This furniture is in-house constructed, it's in-house designed, and I think very well done. I discussed that in the previous video. There's a lot of value. These iron sights are over $200 by themselves. There's a lot of value that comes in this rifle that are not necessarily derived from places that people a lot of time will complain or discuss. And that's one of the reasons why I would say that if you're more concerned about those things, there are other possibly less expensive options out of the market. If you're just going to go out, talk about groups and all that kind of stuff, or perhaps only fire a couple hundred rounds a year out of your rifles, maybe this is not where you have to spend your money, or you feel like you have to spend your money. I completely understand the idea of, buy once, cry once, but there is a certain amount of context that has to go in with that statement. And I think that overall, the story of this rifle is a story of context. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and it's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.